Welcome to the YSEALI Game Changers program and our first webinar of this program, Assembling a Diverse A-Team. Woo. So in a fast-paced and competitive world of game development, it is so easy to focus on acquiring the most skilled and experienced team members. Building a diverse team is more than just checking the right boxes. A team with a broad range of backgrounds brings a wealth of different perspectives and approaches to problem solving, which is essential to creating games that are socially conscious and meaningful. Here, we are going to discuss practical strategies for attracting and retaining diverse team members and how to preserve the values of inclusion and equal opportunity from within your team. So as mentioned earlier, today I have with me is Paula, live from California, the founder and co-chair of IGDA Climate SIG. And we also have Lim from Indonesia, the founder of Kailan Arts. Please check out the upcoming I Need Space, and also follow them on social media. And then there's me, I'm Sophie Azlan. I'm your moderator and more for tonight. I'm a game designer and producer, journalist and lecturer from Malaysia. And I was also the moderator for some of the panels of last year's Games Bagus and a previous mentor for the YSEALI Marine Warriors program last year. And I'm so excited to be part of this year's program as well. So with that, I would like to invite my lovely co-panelists to say hi.
Hello.
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 We are very much on coffee at this blessed hour of what time is it?
Caffeinated.
What time is it for you, Paula, over there in California?
5 a.m.
5
We don't
a.m.
have to talk about it.
5 a.m. coffee. Let's go. What time is it over there in Indonesia, El?
It's at 8 at the moment.
It's 8 p.m. Okay, and it's 9 over here.
I'm
And
having my coffee here.
woo, yeah, I've got water. I had 2 cups earlier, so it's time to get into the questions. Okay, so previously I had shared these questions with the two of you, and we tried very hard to not get into the answers then and there so that we can have our, natural, organic session of game development and diversity here in front of all of these people, which is gonna be super exciting. I'm just gonna get immediately into the first question, and then we'll go from there. So first of all, our whole thing today is about diversity and inclusion. However, diversity and inclusion in teams will often mean, differences, diversity in race, religion, culture, gender, sexuality, perspective, experience, and more. So what can we as project leaders do to ensure that we have a space that attracts such a range of people to work with us? So I want to ask Paula to answer this one first, since the perspective of hers is going to be a little bit different from Elle and mine, since we're coming from Southeast Asia. She's coming in from the US.
Sure. I can at least get us started. So I think first and foremost, it's important for all teams at all levels of leadership to think about why diversity and inclusion matters. And a lot of the time, everybody has a different definition of what accessibility, inclusion, belonging, all of these terms look and feel like. And from a game development perspective, inclusive design, for instance, is a concept that feels very new to gaming. But when we think about our global reach of, over 3 billion players all over the planet that all engage with our content in many different ways, there's no way for a single monolithic view of how a good game looks is going to encompass everybody's needs. And so from a business standpoint, in order to be able to reach as many players as possible, to be able to pay your bills and continue to generate interest and engagement with your community, you need to have a diverse way of thinking. And so for leadership, first, making sure that your leadership team is diverse, acknowledging what your expectations and success, like definitions of success look like, and then making sure that the way you take new hires in, the way you recruit, the way you even message, your mission, vision, content, what you're looking to bring on your website and any of your external facing communications, taking the extra step to make sure that there isn't language in there that may bar certain audiences from feeling like they're allowed to participate or allowed to put their name in the ring. There's a lot of different ways in which you can make sure that your language is gender neutral, making sure that you're not necessarily gating an experience with a certain like level of like academic and industry expertise that may not actually be reachable for somebody at that level of work. There are many ways to increase the opportunity from the moment in which someone first engages with you. I'll start there and transfer over to Elle.
Yeah, Elle, what's your take on this?
Oh, that's an awesome explanation already from Paula. But yeah, I second the notion that I think it trickles down from leadership, right? And what that is pretty much just communicating a very clear vision. And so I feel like that's, yeah, first step. It's great that we open with this question as well, because I think really that kind of covers the whole thing, right? So in our case, in our studio in Highland Arts, especially for me, I really truly believe in the philosophy of showing rather than just telling, right? So we try to put all of that examples up on the website, for example, like our portfolio, so that you kind of, as someone who wants to collaborate or wants to, have a consideration on joining to be a part of the team, you can kind of have an idea before you even meet us in person. You kind of have an idea on what the activities and some of the things that we're involved in, all of that from the get-go, right? You can just kind of like view it there. Everything is there. So yeah, I feel that in our case, our value lies in creating interactive storytelling experiences that really embodies cultural, social, and environmental values and awareness. And this is very challenging in and of itself, right? So we really need to show that clearly. And I think the other side of that is to also accept someone or like to be inclusive, as Paula said. And in the best way to do that is to practice something that is called like a blind resume, right? And that's again, it's pretty much the same thing that we're doing from our side to show and not tell, not just tell, but now it's from your end, right? So we kind of like looking for people and talents without actually seeing where they're from, or their religion, or their races, or their whatever. We just want to see like your work. We just want to see the portfolio and what you're capable of, your experiences. And more often than not, I feel that that automatically kind of translates to having people who are diverse. Again, diversity, I feel like it's also a very loose term nowadays. And I think it's not just about race, religion, and gender, but it's really about like the kind of experiences that you have, right? So for example, in our case, in video game, I feel like the more video games that you play, the more types and genres really comes into play. uh, and yeah, I just had this conversation very recently where we hired a new candidate, and I literally had this conversation where I said, who would have thought that playing a lot of types of video games would get you in a position to be like this today, right? To be in a position where you can get a great job and do things that you love. So yeah.
May I?
So, oh yeah, sure, go for it, go for it. Yeah.
I wanted to add an additional lens to what Elle has beautifully articulated related to enabling people to come as they are. I think it's also really important for all of us to acknowledge that we all have our own stressors that are going on always, but also particularly right now. We've had to deal with, extreme weather events. We've had to deal with a global crisis of many different complexities. And that has a lot of stress and trauma. And when we think about our industry, the way in which we create experiences that bring people in and enable them to feel something, to either escape or connect with people, that requires a lot of complex systems thinking and design, which requires a lot of creativity. And creativity can be impacted when we're burnt out and we're tired. And when we put that in the context of a hiring pipeline and a talent engagement pipeline, our historical crunch culture does not put us necessarily in the best situations to maximize the amount of creativity and social connection that we can have to create new ideas and bring them to the table. you layer that with like a hiring experience where you're meeting a bunch of people for the first time and you're like having to deal with the endless deluge of questions to like prove your value and opportunity, right?
Yeah.
It's incredibly stressful. And so another facet of inclusion is thinking about neurodivergence. And for anyone who's new to the topic of cognitive accessibility and neurodivergence, it's really about understanding the different ways in which we process and perceive information. And when we think about neurodivergence in the context of hiring and also just creating our development processes, it's important for us to think about like, what do we have going on right now and what do other people have going on right now that may not necessarily enable them to bring their best self, but regardless, they bring a lot to the table. And they are like everybody has a valid perspective in that process. And so inclusion also means thinking about the information that you need to tackle together and thinking about like, what does this person need to feel safe? Do they need more time to process information? Are there breaks that need to happen in between the interview sessions so that they have time to like get through that stress cycle and come back ready to engage with an open mind? Are there different ways of processing information that certain team members may need to have? So captions for conferencing, written notes, providing multiple pathways so that if a person like either has a cognitive accessibility consideration or is just really tired because their kid was up for all night and they run on 2 hours of sleep and they don't know what day it is, all of that is very important from hiring to retention.
I love that you bring up this historical trait of game developers and crunch, right? This term crunch that we always have, this notorious term, right? And I feel like that's I mean, in a lot of ways, I feel that it's almost synonymous with like a launch, right? Which is so horrible.
I hate
but
it.
Yeah.
Do it differently. Everybody do it differently.
Yeah,
we're getting there.
I feel that there's always like I don't know, in the first place to even have that, it just means that, I mean, it shouldn't be a culture, right? But in the first place that we have that almost like a culture, it just means that there's just a way where developers are communicating within the team. It's just something entirely quite broken with that, right? Something that needs to be addressed. And I feel like, again, going back to the question, I think the first thing that really needs to be addressed is communication, or like the clear vision that we all should really have coming in. And that really trickles down. It really does. And I feel like that in many ways, having breaks, like you said, and having like what do you call that? Like kind of not healing, but like just having some gaps in between to kind of like process everything and then kind of come
periods
back
of
again.
processing. That's basically what you're asking for, right? Yeah. So everyone kind of retain what's been happening.
And in turn, essentially, that will kind of create an even better, more efficient workflow. So actually, it does sound a little bit counterintuitive to some people, like why are we wasting time, right? But it really does help, especially like having meetings. And I think I want to stress having meetings not only when you have problems, right? Because that's usually what happens. You only have meetings when you have problems and you're trying to solve them. But that kind of like ends up every time you meet this person, we're going to be talking about problem. So you're associating this person with a problem all the time. So I feel it's also very important to have regular meeting to address something positive, right? Just to kind of like share what achievements we have this week or whatever achievement we have this month, things like that. And I think it sounds somewhat counterintuitive, but I have firsthand experience that this can be a really great boost and just kind of like, essentially it'll create a better turnout.
So, okay, well, first of all, I just realized my video's been mirrored this whole time. Boom. Okay, second of all, I really like how, Paula, you mentioned like the language that we're using. It needs to be more inclusive, and therefore that is already like going to bring people in because the language that you're using is not going to assume that somebody is going to be a set type of way. It's not going to be putting out this image that like you have to be just the XYZ in order for you to get job with you, that kind of situation. And also I really like, El, how you mentioned like we should not be having meetings just if we have problems, because we will associate meetings and those specific people with problems. It really just seems like the way to go in order to be more open and to attract and retain this inclusive talent is to overall be more considerate. Who would have thought that that's really the way to go? Because people are different, developers are different nowadays. The thing about the games industry, right, is that the crunch culture thing is such a big deal. When you talk to people sometimes, like if they're outside of the industry, the crunch culture part is the only part that they actually know about. They're like, oh, I know you don't sleep at all, and you're like, well, I mean, but it's like,
and the worst part is sometimes you're proud of that too, which is
yeah,
horrible.
it's like I feel like the games industry as a whole, not just speaking from the Southeast Asian perspective or strictly the Western one, is really in this period of transition where we're going from what's considered the old ways, which is the crunch culture 9 to 5 or like the unpaid overtime and everything like that, to something that is a little bit more considerate, something that's kinder, something that's a bit more open. And the problem is sometimes we're going to be facing a lot of pushback from not only so-called people who came before us, but also people of our own generation who just don't see the point in making that change. So the fact that we have people like you guys, and we also have people like me, I suppose, because now I'm in education and I'm getting those people out there too, the two of you basically, we can change that perspective and we can overall make the industry a kinder place. So it means a lot to hear that you're working towards more inclusive language, you're working towards making spaces better. And it's not just based on physical attributes, it's also we're considering those who are, not necessarily going to be thinking the same way, and sometimes people who just need a little bit more help to produce the quality work. So I think that's really, really great. And moving on to the next question, actually, now that we've gathered all these diverse perspectives onto our team, we want to showcase that everyone's experiences are of value and are valid, and they can contribute to our project's development in some way. So what are some ways that you have managed to incorporate these perspectives into your process and ensure that all team members have had their voices heard through it all? We'll start with Paula again.
I was going to say, it goes back to hiring for very diverse teams and making sure that you're celebrating success. I think when we talk about, and I'm so glad that you brought up the moment of transition that we're in, that is painful for a lot of people, because it's a mix of people who have, full transparency, benefited from these very siloed perceptions of what a good team and good product looks like. And then there's people who have had to kind of just deal with it and try to create change incrementally within, that haven't wanted to disrupt because they have had to deal with, consequences for trying to change things in a time where change, the conditions for change were less hospitable. And so I think that in order to showcase the value that this brings, first and foremost, people have to be vocal about celebrating success. And it's difficult in certain teams because we've gotten so used to us as an industry focusing on competition. Like, we have to have the competitive advantage. We have to have unique things that no one else is going to be able to harness. And I'm going to protect that until the day we launch, and leakers suck. And sure, that is certainly true from a market share perspective. You want the products that you bring to feel really special. But at the same time, the challenges that every person faces in trying to do this work requires us to continually reinforce. And that also means, making sure that the processes that we have hold space for these bias checks. So if there's, say, a milestone for a game that's being developed and you're having to submit something to a review committee, calling out opportunities where you've engaged in proactive diversity and inclusion, having leadership celebrate that explicitly, and making sure that if there are any situations in which you feel like we may be at risk of potentially physically or emotionally, psychologically harming someone on our team or someone in a marginalized community or around a sensitive topic, that we need to support each other in creating safety to bring that up. And it can be very isolating for people, like for any of us, to be that, like, feeling like we're that single voice in the conversation to say, wait, hold on, that is accidentally discriminatory, or that may make certain like groups of people uncomfortable. And so making sure that there's social accountability to, protect each other when it feels unsafe. And that's really important.
I just want to add in really quick that I appreciate that you mentioned like we should be celebrating our achievements as well. But I do want to ask, can you give an example of celebrating your colleagues' achievements? Like, does it have to be this big song and dance? Because there are some people who they genuinely just don't know how to celebrate each other. So when they do, it's gotta be this whole big urba, and then it ends up being like bordering on being like a performative, which then it feels even worse, because at the end of the day it's like, sometimes in these teams you're not aiming to be a disruptor, but something's got to change. And if what's got to change is just that you're gonna be like acknowledging somebody else doing well, so can you give an example of just like how celebrating somebody can be basically in like an ideal environment?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the best way to get rid of the feelings of it being performative is to normalize positive feedback at all levels of communication. So again, like we're really used to having to prepare for the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And we're hyper vigilant as a result of that. And so
and that's a trauma response, I've learned.
It is 100% a trauma response. 100%. Yeah. When we at least like taking the IGDA Climate Special Interest Group as an example, and for anyone new, it's a grassroots community that is in the video game industry. There are 400 game developers, researchers, scientists worldwide who are trying to make the climate movement more accessible to more people in our industry. And when the pandemic hit in 2020, we had just gotten formed, and all of us wanted to be able to continue to engage. Many of us lived in different locations, and traveling to each other, and the carbon emissions associated with travel kind of conflict with our overall mission. And so we created these community norms by, having a group of us just repeatedly assert to everybody who came in as a new member to say, like, these are the things that we're doing. How may I support you? Like, at the end of the day, I am here to support you. How are you doing, like, in your day? What are the things, what's one thing that, went well today? What's one thing that went like completely to garbage today? And like, let's like celebrate and mourn that together. And the reinforcement of like every positive thing, from like, I got the best cup of coffee today, to I was able to implement a framework that actively incorporated diversity and inclusion into our game development practices as a portfolio level. All of those wins matter a lot. And what we found as the Climate Special Interest Group continued to grow, is that we'd have game developers coming out of the woodwork, like both people straight out of college and undergrad, to people who have been in the industry for 20 years, who would say that, like, I've spent my entire career so far not realizing that I could feel this way, and not realizing that like how I felt mattered. Like, it was always about the job. And so by helping people feel like their entire personhood is valid and valuable and respected and seen, goes a long way to enabling that. But to go back to your original question, because I realize I'm rambling, for us in day-to-day conversation, acknowledging those small wins in conversation actively, just saying like, I recognize that this is something that you've done, and I think that's good for this specific reason. Making the impact of that win super concrete in those conversations are really important. Leadership should also just acknowledge it in larger group conversations. It's really uncomfortable to be recognized at an all hands or at an industry award show. It's really stressful, but those signals, both from peers and leadership, are really important because it normalizes that. I will stop talking now.
Okay, no problem. I'll get back to it after this. But Elle, what is your take on the same question?
Well, first of all, it's always a pleasure to listen to Paula ramble.
It is.
So
It really is. Yes.
a lot of learning points that I get from her. But yeah, what was the question again? Okay, so
yeah. So the celebrating others, ensure that people are being heard within your team. Right. Yeah.
So kind of going back to your point about making it not seem like a formality, right? Like it's not performative, things like that. Well, fortunately for our team, disclaimer first, we are a very small team. We're always about like 10 to 15 people at most times. So it's relatively small for a game studio. We're independent. So it's actually very organic for us to kind of like celebrate wins, so to speak, right? So we do celebrate things like just small things like birthday and things like that, and that's kind of like, you know, just appreciating somebody's achievement. But I feel like all of this couldn't have been done if we haven't put in place like what we talked about earlier about having this regular space to really like be able to kind of like get each other to kind of talk and sit down and just kind of talk. Again, not just about achievements, but also about everything, right? You kind of have to be honest with one another sometimes too, right? And a lot of times actually, and that's the way that we can kind of get better and really like learn from one another. Like some things are just not working, some things are working, but I think it's important to have that in place first, and then that way we can have like, you know, award ceremonies and everything on top of that, and that's kind of like more of a something that everyone's kind of like already in the groove about. You know, it's not something that's so sudden, like, oh, what's all this about, right? Like just suddenly, you know, like we're celebrating something. Do we do it again? Do we not do it again? Do we, you know, that's kind of like a weird space in between kind of feel. So I think it's very important to have that in place first. And I think the challenge, once you kind of have that, I feel that is always now that you have this understanding that you can have this freedom of being able to have your voice out. Now the challenge now becomes, now you have all these voices, right? And then how do you keep them cohesive? I feel like that's also another thing that is very, at least in my experience, is quite a challenge, right? It's something that I have to manage, and I think like a lot of leaders that just starts out, I think you kind of like always fall into like the very hands-on approach of, well, you're just trying to steer the ship, and it's just really tough to like steer the ship without steering the ship with, you know, just by letting go and letting people have their own voice. And that's something that you kind of have to learn. And at least in my experience, I really have to kind of like really figure out how to do this, right? And to let people just let everybody, let all the talents really speak out for themselves. And I think the key, at least again from my situation, I'm a musician, right? So I feel like there's a lot of similarities in it may sound a little bit cliche, but like to work in harmony, you can play any melodies you want as long as you're on the same scale. That really is what a harmony is in music. And I feel like I can really see this in parallel to how I manage my team. So that way, if everybody knows the scale that we're in, you can pretty much sing any melodies you want. You can really have your own voice however you want. And that's really a win-win, because now I don't have to be the octopus guy that I was like a few years back, where I have to do everything. And now I can like let everyone delegate everything, and I'm happier. Everyone's happier. They got their voice. I got my voice. So, you know, it's a win-win thing. So I feel like this is something that's a big challenge for me for sure when starting out. And I think it's worth knowing this, right? That's the solution to this.
Because one of the biggest things is, right, when you have a team that's like working together in harmony. Also, I did not know you were a musician, so that's a really neat little fact drop. It's great. What is it? It's like, because it's a safe space and you've worked so hard to create this environment where people can like voice out things and whatever. One of the most difficult things is that you've created this company culture where everybody is like on the same page, but then when somebody has a differing opinion, it needs to be safe enough for somebody to voice out that they feel a bit differently from what everybody else is feeling. You know, they can kind of buck the norm. It's like, you know, everybody's like, I think that the sky is blue, and then you get the one guy who's like, actually I kind of think it's pink, and then, you know, you don't get a situation where everybody turns around and is like, heathen. You know, you actually get a situation where the person can say that and you can have a conversation about it, and then you can move forward from it. So I think it's really good that, you know, both of you have established like there are ways that when the leadership is in harmony with the rest of the team, the environment feels safe enough for somebody to voice these things. And I think that this is something that definitely a lot of people can learn from when they're leading their own teams and trying to construct a diverse team. Yeah. You know, it's and then also like on the topic of acknowledging things, right? I do agree that the games industry is so highly competitive. Again, this is one of those things that we're kind of in transition with because like I love healthy competition. I love like, you know, when you have somebody that you highly respect and you're kind of like, I'm gonna best them this time because they're gonna best me the next time. We're all great and we're all gonna share information and education, boom, 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 boom. But that's not like a toxic thing necessarily, because we respect each other and we're still going to be able to go at it and everything. It's like, even if we have these competitive feelings because the games industry is so competitive, we're still able to not be jerks to one another, I think, bottom line. Yeah. So
minimum bar.
Minimum bar. I mean, we're in an industry where I've got friends, when they graduated from uni, they were off the expectation that they were just gonna walk out into the industry and get hit by a bus because it was like, I'm gonna get mistreated because that's just how the industry works. And when you try to tell them otherwise, they're like, no, things just don't work like that. What are you talking about, Sophie? I am gonna unpaid OT and that's just what it's gonna be like. And you're like, please, you deserve better than that. So the fact that, you know, the two of you are part of making the change, that's not going to be the case, is great. You know, we can look at our friends now and they can be like, hey, I made a really good cup of coffee today, and you can be like, slay, that's great. You know, we're trying to create that environment. Thank you. Yes, love that for you. You know, they can be like, I was featured in this thing and everything's and I'm being acknowledged for my achievements in the workplace, and that's really great. And it's something that deserves celebrating, that people deserve to be celebrated. It's not just going to be they got the one thing and I did not. So that is fantastic. We are doing so well at this. Go games industry.
I mean, that, like, I think that raises like a really important point, right? Like the way in which we set expectations for our industry and our organizational cultures
Yes.
are all learned behaviors. And the fear and the expectation that we should just like know that people are going to harm us and we should prepare ourselves,
Yes,
like, is something that we've learned as a result of trauma.
yeah.
And speaking from personal experience, like, you know, first jobs out of the game industry, I had to deal with a lot of like sexism and harassment, and I was of that cohort of industry professionals who just assumed that like that those were the dues I had to pay as an immigrant woman of color entering the industry.
It's even worse when it's like your dues, right? It's like, I have to go
right,
through
like
this and then
to get to the old boys club. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, like one of the first managers I ever had basically told me that if I wanted to succeed in this industry in the early 2000s, I had to forego work-life balance, don't have relationships, like, you know, like make sure you appear serious for the job. And that, you know, like that, you know, made me compartmentalize a lot of the things that I felt wrong, but I had learned and assumed until I was surrounded by a wonderful like group of women and people of color who like helped me reframe my sense of self, right? And I think in thinking back to how do we hire, how do we reinforce inclusive cultures that enable us to still get stuff done, I think it's important for us to think about it in the context of hope. So one of the through research that the IGDA Climate SIG community has done, in major part led by one of our PhD researchers, Clayton Whittle, shout out. We research like found that hope is a predictor of positive environmental behavior, and I think positive behavior overall. And I think it's important for us to decouple our idea of hope from it being an emotional thing. Like diversity and inclusion is not just our emotions and our sense of belonging. It's a business decision. It's and hope in that sense is a form of goal-directed thinking. So it's a way of having the ability to find actionable routes to achieve your desired goals. But in order for hope to be maintained, for people to be willing to put themselves repeatedly in situations where they may experience friction or harm because they feel the long-term goal is worth it enough, every single team that does this needs to have social trust. So people need to believe that the people around them are going to help take care of them and provide mutual care. They need to be able to see the pathway to that success. So leadership needs to reinforce that you're on the right track or help course correct you in a safe way, in a kind way, in order to be able to see that you're still making progress in spite of any challenges that come. And people need the confidence and support to be able to do what they do best. And that can't happen if people feel unsafe.
So before we move on to the next question, right, Elle, I just want to ask, when you started your studio, essentially, did you also have any kind of set perceptions about needing to pay your dues to the games industry before you got started?
Oh wow, I for sure.
Yeah.
Well, again, well, in my case, I feel that I come from well, I kind of already mentioned that earlier. I'm a musician as well, and I
Mhm.
come from a bunch of different other backgrounds actually. Before I decided that I think gaming or the game industry is kind of like my path, my the one for me. So I feel like I have a lot to prove too, for sure. Especially the first time I started was in the UK. That's where I studied, and I feel like uh, in my school in Norwich University at the time, there literally were only two Asians. It's just myself and a Singaporean,
Oh,
and so we were the minority for sure. And I was the only one in my alumni of game design course, right? So I think I have a lot to prove for sure. And I don't know in what way that kind of like affect me, but I hope to a positive note. But I feel like yeah, that kind of like propels a little bit of a I don't know, maybe some kind of ambitious, not ambitious, but like a goal, right? A personal goal to kind of like prove in a way to show that okay, I can do it just as well. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Because it's just like, we were seeing that there's just this perception of like the industry is as it is, and we're in that transitionary period where we're changing into making the industry more inclusive, overall healthier. Healthy. I think that's the best way to put it. The industry is healthier for its developers and the processes overall. But the fact that we're also coming from backgrounds where we felt that we had to prove ourselves, I think that does play a big part in why we're working as hard as we are and needing to showcase that the industry does need to change and it will continue to change even after we're done. Because it's like I understand where you're coming from in the feeling like the minority. When I was studying game development myself, my batch was about like 30 guys, and I was one of two girls the entire time. So I definitely had that personal vendetta in a sense to prove myself, even if nobody was saying it like verbally. I felt it, at least in my gut. So it just felt like I needed to show that I was deserving of the time that everybody was giving me, and I needed to really like push myself further than anybody else really was at the time, that kind of thing. So the industry is changing, things are different. I'm sure that now there are cases where game design classes have more Asians in them, God willing, because of people like you know? So that's fantastic, yeah.
And to add to that also, I feel like on a personal level, in the local level here in Indonesia, I feel like gaming has always been on the backseat of yeah the business side of things, right? So I think
Yes.
not a lot of people not just Indonesia, but I think in Southeast Asia, right? I think it's always been like the little brother of the entertainment industry, and
Yes.
obviously has grown so much in the past few years, especially over the pandemic. And I think a lot of people are starting to open their eyes. I mean, I'm simply just talking about like parents' generation, especially, right? And I think they're starting to come to terms and to understand. But before that, when I was starting out, for sure, there was so much pressure on getting this right the first time, for sure, because yeah, especially yeah, again the cliche of being an Asian, you kind of expected to do the very Asian jobs, right? And when you're not, when you're like, why are you playing games? Were you working on something that's like not gonna make you money right away? That's just
Yeah.
like there's so much for you to prove, like, and developing game takes like years, right? It's so difficult to kind of like show that right away. You kind of have to really be really be patient and agree to disagree for like the first few years, and then after that, kind of like, okay, see, and unfortunately in my case, I have something to show for it. Yeah, hopefully. So, the next game's still in the making, so the jury's still out, but at least I have something to show for it for the game that I've already made, Samudra, right? So, and I think that kind of like put the parents' generation kind of like at ease to some extent. And I feel like there's a lot of Indonesian developers right now that are going through this phase as well. Certainly, my seniors are still going through that as well, like in Indonesia. But I feel like not to ramble too much about this, but
It's okay.
in general, gaming community in the first place is quite inclusive already anyway, because I think we're quite. I mean, looking at this from a point of view where you're comparing like films or music industry, where it's like really competitive and really like each its own. But gaming is a lot more inclusive and a lot more camaraderie, because it's just the way that we, games are meant to be played together, right? It's just how it's made. So I feel like there's that, at least on a positive note, that we kind of have that built into our culture. So when I look at someone else, like another game developer from a different company here in Indonesia, I really truly see them as like kind of like paving the path together, So yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, they're like my comrade, you know. I
Yeah.
too have been traumatized by the same things. I also look at GitHub and scream. So yeah. Before I move on to the next question, Samudra and the upcoming I Need Space, please check it out, wishlist it, support Southeast Asian game developers. Woo 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 woo. So since we are on the topic of community, I think it's really good if we go straight into the community question. For the two of you, are there any communities that you are aware of or a part of that have helped you in working with diverse talents, let it be by hiring for your projects or by finding others in and out of the industry to work with? So we'll start again with Paula.
IGDA.
Yeah, I was going to say shameless plug for the International Game Developers Association.
Be shameless. Go.
Thank you. Yes. Our executive director, Dr. Jake Bella, is phenomenal. One of the best humans I've ever met. And like he and so many of the leadership team and so many of the community leads who chair all of the different industry like community groups and associations are very invested in doing more for inclusion, like bringing more voices to the table, making sure that people feel that they can find like-minded professionals and advocates who want to be able to amplify each other's voices and also find what they need in terms of resources, employment opportunities, ways to just share knowledge and experiences. So that's one. I would say in general, like Fair Play Alliance is another organization who is doing a lot of industry-wide work to build frameworks to understand toxicity and disruptive behavior in game design itself. And gaming communities, because that can go a long way to enabling more people to feel a sense of belonging and inclusion, as if we decrease the incentives to engage in disruptive and harmful behavior and decrease feelings of loneliness and isolation, everybody benefits, right? Regardless of, right, shocker, minimum bar. And lastly, I mean, I hate to say, I hate to acknowledge this, but a lot of my, up until I think I'd say like the last 5 years, like I honestly really didn't have a community. Like I had to kind of learn to honestly like decolonize my perception of like what it meant for me to be good enough. And it was again surrounding myself with people who made me feel safe, allowed myself to be honestly, like allow myself to feel hope and find and connect with people in my work who like wanted to strengthen each other, wanted to bolster and hype each other up. And I have the good fortune of having found a really strong group of women, in particular from my time at Stadia, rest in power. We all come from different disciplines, and this kind of like organically happened over time as we trauma bonded together. and basically like found ways to like just connect with each other personally. Like our personalities and interests got along really well, and then we slowly started to share like and disclose our lived experiences, which led to us, you know, building strong connections of trust, which led to us then having, you know, more vulnerable conversations about what we're doing well as an organization, what we have to improve upon. And that then translated to stronger strategies and business decisions that we were able to make, particularly in times of crisis, and you know, tight deadlines and needing to prioritize. And so I think it's don't like there's these large industry community associations that are here to support you. But there's also acknowledging that your personal relationships are just as important and can be utilized in a business setting.
How about you, Elle? Like, do you have any specific communities in and out of the games industry that have helped you?
Yeah, and I think I want to take this time to emphasize a little bit more on the collaboration that we always do with nonprofit organizations here in Indonesia. Because unfortunately, I think I mentioned the other day when we were talking, when we were discussing that I unfortunately feel most of the time quite alone in this because, yeah, that's unfortunately not too many or not at all actually game development studios that actually does the same thing that we do. I hope that in the future we can see a lot more of that, which is why I'm so happy to get to know you guys, especially with communities like IGDA. This is what I told you guys the other day, and I truly feel this, that I'm so happy that I'm not on my own, right? I'm not doing this just on my own. But yeah, but there's not an infrastructure like that or platform like that quite yet in Indonesia, and I'm hoping to see this change. But yeah, we do work as a company, and I feel like not just as a studio, but in a personal level as well. Anyone can kind of do this too. Uh, but we work with like communities from Dia Kantong Plastic here, which translates to plastic bag diet, literally, and they're on the forefront on changing policies of plastic policies here in Indonesia, in Jakarta especially. Especially right now, we're on a campaign on adjusting the policies on food delivery services. You know, where you have too much of excess in plastic bags, and so that's kind of like one of their key goals for the next few years. And then we have Econusa here as well, who similarly does a lot of fights on on the front of like pollutions and ocean, but also like deforestation in Papua. And then Diverse Clean Action, which we have worked with on a fundraising to plant coral reefs in nearby islands. And then there's Pulau Plastic in Bali. They've already released a film on Netflix, which we're so proud to be a part of as well. And that's something that you should definitely check out as well. And there's of course like the big one like Greenpeace, right? Who's on the forefront and talking about like urban issues such as like city pollution, things like that. So I think these are some of the just some of the names that you can kind of check out and be a part of if you're interested in this side of things. And again, you don't really have to be an activist to be a part of it. I certainly don't see myself as purely as an activist. There are people who are definitely way more qualified to be in that position, who's been fighting for decades and decades on the front. And I'm just here as a silly game developer, just trying to do
Not
my
just
part.
silly, hey, a powerful game developer.
Power, yeah. But I'm just trying to do my part. I'm trying to do my part, just to kind of complete that. I think I mentioned the other day. I think this is important to note as well that I mentioned the other day. You know, there's an issue where you know, environmental or social, not just environmental, but also like social issues like mental health and things like that. You know, it kind of like circles around. Like when you talk about it, the only people that knows and are caring or care about it are the people that already knows as well, right? So how do we kind of, especially with environmental issues, how do we bring this to a larger audience or to expose it and to bring a better awareness? So I think that's where we come in, where we can kind of like help them bring some of this campaign into a bigger or like a different type of audience. Like in my case, I'm bringing it to gamers, right? People like myself who loves games, who love just hang out. And you know, wouldn't that be great to kind of like hang out and be entertained, but also at the same time kind of like saving the world, and or at the very least not make the world worse, right? So that's the goal. That's the first goal, not make it worse. and then do something about it. And again, I think I want to stress on not just talking about it, but actually doing something about it. Go out there and do something, like whatever, however small, like beach cleanup and things like that. So you don't really have to be a part of any studios or anything like that. You can be an individual and you can join any of the groups that I just mentioned. Yeah, I'll be more than happy to kind of like link anyone who wants to be a part of that.
So I really like the takeaway of you don't gotta be an activist to take action. That's basically what it is, which is great. Yeah, because and then also you did bring up a really good point about how wouldn't it be great to be entertained in a way, but then also not make the world worse, which is something else. Because I know that there's a lot of people who feel very sensitive about engaging with media that's trying to teach them something and then feel like they're being taught. So the fact that you're working on something that is trying to teach them without shoving it down their throats or whatever is very important. You are doing your part in educating the masses, aka the gamers. So that is fantastic.
That is a challenge on its own as well, right? To
It
kind of like
is.
bring an information like that, but in a way that it's not, yeah, like you said, not shoving that down their throat. So how do we do that? And yeah, that's a challenge, right? As
Yeah, it
game
is.
developers, as designers, that's how we present the idea, or like the inception of the idea. As long as we get it going. I think that's the main goal, just to get it going, get someone to talk about it, and then eventually, ideally, you want them to take action.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Paula, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, related to Elle, I could listen to both of you all day. I think that the point about like the idea that like something that is going to have social or environmental impact is shoving something down people's throats, like that 100% is a talking point we hear all of the time, right? And a lot of detractors or people who don't believe in this as like something that can generate like positive business impact and revenue, like often have the talking point of like, oh, don't bring your politics into my games, or like, don't bring reality into my games, like I'm trying to escape right now, like why are you ruining my game experience? Games are inherently lenses by which we view the world and what's possible. Like our biases will always make their way into our games, right?
I need that quote like embroidered on a pillow or something. Yeah, that was very profound.
A needlepoint above my mantle.
Yeah, legit.
But it's inescapable, right? And so the way we the best way for us to do that, honestly, like at the end of the day, is to make a really good game. Like make a really good game, like and make sure that the people on your team are able to tackle and help build a great experience, and help like identify problems that you may not see because your lived experience is inherently different. It's not a matter of like taking away power from someone. It's not a zero-sum game in this collaborative process. It doesn't have to be. And so like bringing these experiences to life necessitates us to also like put ourselves in other people's shoes, and we can't do that without a diverse team. Yeah, I loved everything that you said, Elle.
And I want to triple that as well. Because there's so many occasions where I guess someone from the education sector or like the environmental sector comes and approach Highland Arts and just kind of like request, okay, can we make a game or like make something? We do animations, web comics, and workshop art installations as well. But the request that we get is always like, how can you translate this information directly into something that can be, you have to create some awareness, right? But most of the time, that is really, to me, not attractive. Like as a gamer, I don't see that as being attractive. I don't want to play educative games. What is educative games, right? It's just something that not naturally something I want to play. And I feel like having nieces and nephews that's like around the age of 5 to 6, I'm pretty sure they don't really want to bat an eye even on talking about like looking at games like that. So I feel that that's our job, right, as game developers, to kind of like let them know that, okay, this is what sort of the essence that we want to tell, and then we kind of like retell that. And like Paula said, I think all games to begin with is grounded somehow from references in real life anyway. So it's just how you kind of like present it. That's the kind of like the key, right? And that's something that I've always been trying to still learning and just trying to get deeper into. And I feel like that's been the joy of my process as a developer, but also the challenge. But yeah, yeah.
I mean, like, it's going to be a constant thing that you're going to be trying to balance anyway. But I would like to say that I think you're making excellent progress already as it is. So, yeah, you know. Uh, okay,
Yeah.
I want to get into like the last question. I
Mm.
want to really tie things together and make things a bit personal. So, what is your opinion on diversity in the game development community now in comparison to how it was when you first started? Is there anything that you wish was already there when you were first working?
I kept thinking about this question like in preparation for it because I have a tendency to overshare my lived
Oh,
experiences.
she's ready.
I know. I just well, it's I think it's also I will say it's a difficult question because of all the things that we've discussed before. I think there's a lot of vulnerability in this. And I think that from the perspective of like where I started and the team culture that I had to, repeatedly endure in multiple organizations, big and small. I would say it's better in the sense that people are more willing to talk about these topics today. Like there's an openness and acknowledgement that it is important to us as people and as business and society. I think that there's less shame and stigma around acknowledging mental health, acknowledging neurodivergence, acknowledging trauma that comes from being a person from a marginalized community who, is having to be at 100% when everybody else may be operating at 70. When in reality, our 70% may sometimes be other people's 100%. But we don't see that. Like there's success dysmorphia and like we have like I know I'm still working through healing from my previous definition of productivity. Like I put myself in my work and my core values are directly mapped to my work. And that's something that I think many of us in this conversation really care about. I think the downside of that is that that can be exploited by capitalism. And so if you put all of your heart and soul into something, in for-profit business models and nonprofit business models, it can take more than it gives sometimes. And I think acknowledging that has become easier. I think the thing that's still challenging is that there's still many people in the industry who don't know how to act upon that information because they have been trained to not ask about it, be afraid to ask about it, or can ask about it, but don't have the training or social reinforcement to know how to do it in a way that is respectful. And so that's something that I think we're still learning. But speaking to what I wish was there when I started was honestly like a community of people that made me feel safe. Like it took time for me to learn that I could ask for that and I was deserving for that of that. It took a long time. And I think that I don't regret any of the experiences that I've had in this industry. Like it's the reason why I'm still here and I'm here for the long haul. But I think that having the reinforcement at all levels that like belonging matters, acknowledgement of bias, of discriminatory behavior, of inclusive behavior, of psychological safety, like all of it, honestly, I wish was there back then. So, but glad we're here now.
And we're glad that you're here with us now too.
I'm gonna start crying.
Oh. Well, thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that with us. So, Elle, how about you? Anything you wish was there when you started?
Well, first of all, I feel like we could have just ended there because that's just
It was so
cliche, right?
profound. It was so
Yeah, it's so
profound. I
profound.
agree. Yeah.
But yeah, I if okay, so starting with what I wish was there when I started, probably an event just like this, right? A panel talk just like this. Well, not specifically this panel talk, but like just having a platform for a discussion such as this will be so useful. Will be so helpful, really. Um, yeah, I started out not having any kind of like guidance and like I guess that during that period when I started the studio in Indonesia, I think it's kind of like free for all, almost like a gold rush kind of situation, right, with the gaming industry. Um, and there's just like a lack of guidance, and adding a layer to that is the layer of me having to make a game with the message of environmental and social and cultural values inside of it. It's just like another layer of challenge that I just have nobody to kind of like go to and talk about. And now I do. Again, I've already told you guys this so many times, but yeah, I'm joining the IGDA right after this for sure. I'm just gonna keep bugging you guys. I'm just gonna be yeah, whatever. Yeah,
We
I just
welcome
feel
it.
like
We welcome it.
yeah, I
Yeah,
just
you
feel
can
like
never
there's
bug
a lot
us.
of
That's not happening.
a lot of conversation that I wish I could have had when I started. So I'm just so glad that this is now available. But again, to begin with, I think games are already quite the game industry. I mean, is already quite open to all these notions anyway to begin with. I mean, going back again, I don't come into the game industry wanting to bring in all these values. I think that's not the case. The case is that I think all of these values already existed for a long time. It's just it's just much more rare back then. I remember the first time I played a game like Journey, for example, like from way back when, and I realized that whoa, the game can be so profound, right? It's not just your usual everyday like beat 'em up or slash 'em or whatever, which is all in good fun too. But that can be something more, right? Gaming can be a lot more than that. And uh, yeah, it's to date, I think still one of the games that really still moves me even till today. And I think I'm starting to see a lot more of that. Again, like just renditions of that, evolutions of that. For example, we talked about Spirit Power before, right? Games like that really has such a deep message, and it's just the way that it's presented is so much more digestible, right? It's not something that is shoved down your throat like we talked about earlier. So I think gaming industry in general has always been very open to these things. Just that right now it's starting to be even more accessible. So I think yeah, I'm happy to be somewhat be a part of that contribution. I hope, and I wish to do a lot more in the future.
And I'm
Well,
confident that you will. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Paula. Yeah.
no, please. I adore both of you so much. I'm trying not to cry. I think like Elle, what you just said is really profound, and I think it's really important. I know we have to go to Q&A, but I think that like games are so powerful, and interactive experiences are so powerful because they essentially redefine a relationship with failure. Like the things that we deal with in our day-to-day life, the social issues and environmental and economic issues and cultural issues that we navigate today, they're high stakes, right? Because the decisions that leaders make, the decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis have real world consequences. And games allow for this like beautiful, like difficult, complex space to be interacted with in a way that if you fail, you're able to try again. And that's something that I know a lot of nonprofit organizations that I've worked with have come to recognize, is that like there are these real world issues of sustainability and mental health that like are really difficult to tackle, but the playfulness of games allows people to like suspend disbelief for a moment and consider an alternate perspective, consider an alternative way of solving problems. And that creates, a willingness to be resilient, a willingness to try again. And when we think about how we build these teams to enable and serve that function, we're essentially doing that through diversity and inclusion. Like we're giving ourselves the space to be able to continue to persist even in times of challenge. By thinking about the playfulness of our game experiences, to thinking about like how do we play with like the norms that we've set as a society, and like how do we re-envision that for a better future. And I think like all of the people in this conversation inspire me to do that. I'm very happy to be here, just saying.
I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm incredibly grateful for this opportunity to get to meet the two of you, because just on the topic of like anything that I wish was already there when I first started working. So, you know, I'm a relative newcomer to the games industry as a professional. I've only professionally been in the games industry since like late 2020. So, but the thing was that I just want to shout out like the different parts of the Malaysian game development industry as a whole, because it's like, what did I wish was there when I first started working? It was there already, and I've definitely just been doing my part to further cultivate it, further elevate it, so that it can continue to be a sense of community and driving force for other members within said industry as well. Just to highlight a couple of things, like I completely like echo what Paula had mentioned earlier about communities. Like there are the big ones, the big industry ones, like IGDA Malaysia has been a big driving force in bringing people together. But also it's like the interpersonal relationships. Just to go on like a little tangent before we enter into the Q&A session, I still remember one of my first, we do these things here, the game developer hangout sessions, which were like these physical sessions where people can showcase their games and hang out and get together. And then eventually some people will break away and go to like the Starbucks. Some people will go off and go drinking or whatever, that kind of situation. And I still remember going into one of my first ones as a student and eventually finding a couple of like-minded people, so specifically shouting out like Ling and Rebecca and Jamie and Crystal. And we all basically like T-posed together because we were like too awkward to get in with the rest of the guys. And we were like, is this a safe space for us to interface? And we were like, yeah. And it was like, you like video games? Yeah. And then it kind of just like escalated into something from there. And then from there as well, I've had the opportunity to work with Wig Out, which is Women in Games Hangout Malaysia, which is currently undergoing a rebrand, so look out for that. And then also like other members of the community who are relative newcomers and also industry professionals. So the thing is like we three are very good representations of people who were taken in to be the diversity hire early on. And now we are people who are in positions of leading teams so that people aren't taken on to our projects just to be the diversity hire, but to be included in the conversation. And the conversations that we have will continue to be diverse, and there will be safe spaces for everybody to flourish within this industry, because it's not an easy place to be in. So the least that we can do is to make it more inclusive and ready for the future, and it can continue to evolve and change just as we do as individuals. So I think that wraps up our questions here. I mean, the questions that I've got. And let's move into the audience Q&A. I saw we have 8, so I think we've got enough time to take on a couple of those. First question, I think, from a product standpoint, how do you navigate the need for hierarchy in a game studio, like having a product owner to look up to for efficiency, and the need for having each person in the team to be engaged and involved with the development of the product, like inclusivity down to the bottom, having a voice in the game making process? So navigating the need for a hierarchy within a game development studio and having everyone still be engaged and heard, essentially, right? Paula, do you have like a response to this one?
Yes, it's hard.
Yes.
TLDR, real hard. Sorry, I don't mean to downplay it. It's just
no, but it's true. It's real difficult. Yeah.
But I think and this is something that is something that I've learned that like feels really simple when I say it out loud, but like it took time for me to get here personally, is that like really it comes down to expectation setting. So from the moment you bring in a new hire to your, setting the strategy for your team, to you're making these decisions when you have the space and it's a new project and everything is blue sky, to like, you're right before your alpha test, like you need to make a decision.
Yes.
Expectations and making sure that you set time at the very beginning and throughout your project to like go back to the goals that you've set, that ideally you'd have like achieved shared alignment with your team to do, and leadership, so that when you're in moments where like you have like you don't have the space to like necessarily like have all the time in the world to explore every single pro and con, and you need to make a decision in a way that makes sense for your business, and especially in your contract if you're like building a game for a publisher, having clear goals, or you'll also see them as razors, to be able to go back to say like, this is the decision that we need to make. Let's go back to our goals. Like what decision paths like align with our decisions or not? Because that way, even if you have to make a decision, the rationale is clear. trust is often most likely to break down when people don't understand why you've made the decisions that you've made or don't feel like a part of those decisions. And so being able to like set and reinforce the expectations throughout the process will do a lot to help with that.
And I totally agree with that. I think no sugarcoating, right? So you set the expectations as it is from the get-go, and I think everything will kind of fall into place. Yeah, I think I couldn't have explained that better than Paula, to be honest. So yeah.
Same. I was thinking the same thing. I agree. Transparency goes so far, and maintaining trust. And you say something, you keep to it, you know. So that's basically what it kind of comes down to, and making sure that everyone feels heard in that capacity as well. Thank you so much for your answer. And also, I hope that answers your question, Anissa. So I also have some questions here that are like specifically for Elle, so I want to get to those. Ooh, yeah. Okay, so question from William L. How do you juggle between running and sustaining a studio and championing societal change?
Wow, it's
It's hard.
Yeah, exactly. It's just that's just it, right? I mean, I don't know. I guess it's something that you kind of have to get in the groove too. I think in the beginning, everything is just kind of like a mess. There's a lot of expectation. There's also a lot of goals that you kind of want to achieve, and you get overwhelmed very easily for sure. I've already mentioned earlier, like running a game studio on its own is already a huge undertaking, but now I have this added layer on doing it with another goal in mind, right? Which is like this environmental, social, cultural goal. So it's not easy. I don't know what's the answer to this. I think it's just because it's truly something like I mentioned before. It's not something that I want to bring specifically into the gaming industry or the society or anything like that. It's not like that at all. It's just something that I feel like I have learned or gotten from games, especially in games. I mean, not just from games. It could be from film, it could be from music, from whatever. But especially from video games, where this format of production contains like so many different side of creativity, right? You have dialogues, you have music, you have animations, you have everything. And I've grown up playing a lot of games that really resonates to me and teaches me a lot of this very important values. And I feel like I just want to kind of like give back to that, right? Kind of like package my like kind of pass it on in a way, right, to the next generation, and to talk about things that are of issues of today. So I feel like that's kind of like my purpose, and so I don't really see it as like, you know, okay, like how do I balance this too? I feel like that's just how I am to begin with. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. Again, I don't think I really have a true answer for that. Paula might have one, but yeah, to me, I feel like if that really aligns with your personal purpose, I feel like that will kind of like you kind of will sort it out automatically on its own. I mean, that's not a very technical answer, but it is kind of like the way I approach a lot of the things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like the most technical answer, but it's like a real answer, right?
Yeah. I was gonna say my new goal in life is to regularly check in on Elle and make sure that you're okay. I'm just gonna do that now because like I feel that in my bones, right? And it goes back to like we in our lived experiences are like really, it's really important for us to bring that into the conversation, and to help create spaces where other people who come after us like are in a better situation to like help bring their ideas to life and navigate different problems, because hopefully we'll have solved some of them. I will say from a juggling many competing priorities, especially those that both pay the bills and also have an impact on the world, I think setting, like being clear about your own boundaries and what your needs are is really important. And that extends to all aspects of our life, right? And especially in an industry where historically, like we haven't been taught that we're allowed to have that. We have a right to have that. We have a responsibility to enable that for others. Like it's really hard because there's kind of like some ableism that is inherent to those conversations, right? Like if I make space for myself, if I take a break, then that means somebody is going to perceive me poorly, or I'm not going to be able to impact the change I want, or like I'm not going to be able to progress in my career. And that's where the reinforcement from leadership and peers really matters. Like we need to reinforce that like you're allowed to hold space for yourself. You're allowed, like I'm allowed to hold space for myself. And that doesn't make me less worthy of impact and progress. It's that we need to build new systems that allow for that time so that we're not crunching anymore emotionally and technically.
In fact, I think it's very important to do so because someone in our position just cannot afford to be burned out, right? Because everyone's depending on us. So I think an individual can still kind of afford. I mean, in the ideal case, you don't, but in the case that you do burn out, it's relatively still okay. But as in a leadership position, we just cannot afford to do that. So we need to really know how to kind of balance everything. Yeah, work-life balance is super, super, super important. And the more I run the studio, the more I realize that that's really the key to longevity for sure. I think without having acknowledged that, I would have burned out so long ago, right? I would have not been able to kind of like manage this studio with such a diverse goal as well. Again, the challenge is yeah, it's just so much, right? And just create the game development and to kind of like run a very social aspect of things. And so like, and I think it's also worth noting that it's not even just as a studio, like a business. Like sometimes within the studio itself, like some of the members might not agree, right, on doing two things at once, right? You know, it kind of is like that, right? So developers doesn't necessarily want to be out there doing like beach cleanups, for example, right? So how do we prioritize and not not make it seem like it's a mandatory thing or like something that you kind of have to be pressured into doing. So I think having, again, I think it kind of goes back to the very first question where communication is key and setting like the scale and setting the bar where you can really like say, like have your say is very, very important. I think that's really is key.
I really like the term emotional crunch that was mentioned earlier, you know, because it's like, you know, being in this industry, doing the work and everything, doing the work full stop is just like, it can be so emotionally tiresome. So, you know, acknowledging that you deserve to hold that space as well and making sure that everybody knows it and everybody also can hold that kind of space as well is just so important in developing things well and in a healthy way. So that is great. I think we have enough time for just one more question, maybe two, depending on how we answer this one. So one of the last questions to answer from Stuventus. Great conversations in building a cohesive team. In my experience, leading teams for small game jams, one of the most difficult things is to get everyone on the same page, such as game idea, etc., or to buy into a game idea that other members may not buy into. Do you have any practical tips, say for a fresh team of potential fresh faces that have never met each other, on how to speed run and quickly build a platform of trust for people to be honest and have conducive discussions?
I mean, it sucks, but a lot of it requires modeling emotional vulnerability.
I mean, it's more than
yeah.
just like getting in the room and trauma dumping for sure, but
Yeah,
it does
yeah.
involve vulnerability. Yes.
I will say like my manager, who is the senior director of cloud gaming, Kim Swift, for folks who know, like probably like she designed Portal. One of the things that she has decided to do that's just been amazing is that like she's like unapologetic and assertive about the business and design acumen she has. And for new folks who've never interacted with her before, like that can be really intimidating. But she also pairs it with the willingness to be silly and the willingness to acknowledge, yeah, that looks messed up, let's fix it. And I think that like one of the things that I continue to learn from her and I cherish and celebrate in her is that our idea of professionalism doesn't require us to be in blue button-ups, khaki slacks, assimilating into modern culture and changing from within, right? Like we're allowed to be disruptive. We're allowed to change the perceptions of what a good team and a good professional and a good collaborator looks like. Like all of us are delightfully chaotic human meatbags, and we all bring something special to the table. And so a lot of the time, and like the ability to build like trust is to, you know, be who you are, and give yourself and others permission to show excitement when you're excited, show concern when you're concerned. Like, you don't have to mask in order to be perceived as a valid professional, right? I think that's one of the most important things. And like, I know that seems a little squishy, but like a lot of folks in the industry aren't used to conversations like this. I think like even being able to have these conversations in itself is new and disruptive and interesting. And for, you know, our spaces and these spaces, it may seem like more normal to us. But as you scale out, as you continue to scale your influence, as you continue to meet more people in the industry, the willingness to bring yourself into the conversation while simultaneously like being clear about your own boundaries. Don't overextend yourself or be pulled so much of yourself out that like you're at risk of somebody like taking advantage of that, right? But I think that like being willing to laugh, hold humor, hold grief, and be modeling that so that other people can give themselves permission to do the same matters. Sorry, that was a rant.
It was good though. Elle, what about you? Any tips?
So yeah, first of all, Portal changed my life, so you might want to tell your mentor that.
Yeah, just suddenly just dropping that like major. It's like, by the way, you know, like she designed
Okay.
Portal. What?
Like, that probably changed like millions of kids at my age at the time. Like, just changed the way we think of, you know,
Yeah.
game. So yeah, so that's out of the way. I think one of the way that I can build trust during a project pipeline like that is again, it kind of goes back to communication, right? And I think the best way to communicate, there's no better way than to really just visualize it. I feel like everybody just kind of like talking, not just vision as an abstract vision, but actually visualize it. I think that's always been the best way to kind of like, again, show, not just tell. Um, yeah, and also, uh, yeah, I feel that being visual then allows you to kind of like bring references that might have been very difficult to kind of discuss in a normal setting. So I think that plays a lot of part in the way that we design our game for sure in Highland Arts. So I think, and the other thing that I was going to say, um, I think it's very important to have visions that's clear and like points, so that when you're talking about like some of these things where, you know, you have opinions and you have kind of like design taste, you know, everyone's singing different things again, right? You kind of have something to go back to, and to me that's always been the easiest way to kind of explain it. It's not like how I want this game to be or how you want this game to be, or whoever, but it's how this project should be, right? How this game should be, how this game should be shaped. So that way I feel like we have one common cohesive goal to kind of like work around, and then we kind of like can be as creative as we want, as long as we can fulfill this needs that the project needs. I feel like that's always the way that we kind of approach, and that way whatever kind of criticism or feedback that we have is not personal. It's not because it's you, but it's because of this idea of this project, you know, whatever that project needs just doesn't work for this, you know. So it's never been like a personal thing. I think that way it creates a lot of trust indirectly, right? So but that's kind of like how we always approach things in our studio.
Yeah, definitely. I think that man, I think that both of them have given like a lot of really good tips. I'll give a couple of my own really quick as a bookend to all of this. So you're talking about fresh faces never met each other. How do you quickly build that platform of trust for people to be honest and have conducive discussions? Uh, Easy answer, but also not quite easy. Be professional. But professionalism isn't necessarily what we all think it is. You know, to kind of echo what Paula had mentioned earlier, professionalism is at the end of the day, it is being respectful, but it's also being genuine. It's also being intentional. So typically when you are these things, and of course be kind, but when you are these things, people can kind of gauge People can like gauge your vibe, especially because it's like if you're gonna ask them how are you and you mean it when you ask how are you because you do want to know how this person is doing because you're gonna work with them and they can tell like this person actually wants to know how I'm doing. They're gonna want to trust you more and it'll be easier to have those discussions about the work that needs to be done. When you're intentional about the questions that you ask, you're not just going to be asking questions that are to fill the air. Not to say that you can't make small talk, but you don't want to just be asking things for the sake of filling in that empty silence. You want to be asking things like you want to genuinely get to know the people that you're working with. You want to build up that rapport with them so that you can produce something great, especially within a short amount of time. It's part of the team building that goes into making something good that you get to know one another first so you can understand the references that are going to be coming in. You're going to understand everybody's strengths and weaknesses. And the thing is, like, you're not going to be looking at the strengths and weaknesses so that like this guy sucks at that, but it's more like you understand where people's gaps are, so and you understand who can cover those gaps as well. The same can go for much larger teams. The same can go for much larger developments, and also even outside of the game development setting. This is just part of what it is. To be human is to error, but to also be kind is something that may not be part of our nature, but it goes a long way in trying to produce great things. So, yeah.